The movie kicks off in the bustling surroundings of a high school, where our main characters, Ricky and JT, blend seamlessly with the crowd. They exchange friendly banter, their laughter and vibe palpable. Amid the customary high school chaos, a boy suffering from an asthma attack is cornered by a group of bullies, refusing to give him his inhaler. As tensions build, Joanne enters the scene, playing the role of a rescuer, and hands over the inhaler to the distressed boy. Ricky can't help but stare at Joanne. He seems interested in her, and her unexpected act of kindness adds heat to his already hot crush. In a bid to escape the boredom of their class, Ricky and JT decide on an adventurous detour. They find their way into an ominous, miserable hospital, eerily void of any human presence. Lost in their world of rebellion, they enjoy their beers, engaging in a reckless rampage. The deserted hospital turns into their playground as they shatter windows, trash equipment, create graffiti art on the walls, and scatter papers around in wild abandon. The adventure escalates when JT leads Ricky into an underground passage, once a confinement for the hospital's most dangerous and infected patients. He toys with Ricky's fears, sneaking up on him, evoking an atmosphere of fear. But the scare turns real when a black menacing dog appears out of nowhere. Barely escaping the dog, they stumble upon a rusted door, leading them into a dark, creepy room. In the room, they discover a woman naked and bound, her body concealed under a sheet of plastic. Her faint movements reveal she is alive, but a heated disagreement follows. While Ricky wants to free the woman and flee, JT, charmed by her beauty, proposes a shocking plan to keep her as their sex slave. When Ricky resists, he's met with JT's fist and a harsh dismissal order if he doesn't want to be a part of it. Dejected, Ricky leaves and heads back home when he grabs the phone to call the emergency center and report his recent experience in the hospital. Clint, his mom's alcoholic friend who's staying with them for the time being, shows up and interrupts him. The next segment of the story portrays Ricky practicing with a firearm, his mind haunted by the previous day's events. JT appears, remorse evident in his voice, and he extends an intense apology. He pleads with Ricky to accompany him back to the hospital, stating that there's something unusual about the woman that Ricky must witness. Although hesitant at first, Ricky finally gives in to JT's relentless persuasion. Upon their return, JT reveals his astonishing discovery about the woman. He says that when he tried to get close to her, she tried to kick and bite him, so he hit her many times. But after a while, she started moving again as her body showed tremendous resilience. Ricky, horrified at the sight of the woman's injured state, momentarily faints when JT shoots her in a bizarre attempt to kill her. He wakes up to an even more terrifying sight. The woman, despite being shot, is still alive. JT confesses his unsuccessful attempts to kill her, adding another layer of mystery around the woman who feels cold as death but remains alive. As the shocking reality dawns on them, Ricky suggests they abandon the place and leave the woman alone. JT, however, has a drastically different idea, desiring to use the woman for his sexual pleasure. Initially resistant to this appalling proposition, Ricky eventually submits to JT's persuasion, and they vow to keep this eerie secret between them. As the narrative proceeds, we find Ricky seeking the companionship of another friend, Wheeler, to share a joint after school. Unfortunately, Wheeler already has plans, leaving Ricky to head home alone. A meal and a nap later, Ricky finds himself lost in a dream featuring Joanne, his crush at school. Just as she leans in to initiate an intimate act, her face morphs into that of the strange woman from the hospital, her gaze penetrating his very soul. Startled awake, he impulsively mounts his bike and head towards the hospital. Upon his arrival, he witnesses a shocking sight. Wheeler, his friend from school, is sexually involved with the undead woman. To his dismay, Ricky realizes JT had invited Wheeler to join them, recklessly breaking their pact of secrecy. Ricky's understandably disturbed by the grotesque spectacle. but JT appears unfazed, failing to comprehend the severity of his actions. Distraught, Ricky leaves the hospital, returning with a bolt cutter to liberate the woman from her bonds. However, as soon as he frees her hands, she lunges at him in a savage way. Ricky barely manages to escape her clutches, and JT and Wheeler enter the room. JT suddenly realizes the woman's hands are free. In response, she attacks the two, managing to scratch them before they overpower and restrain her again. All this while, Ricky, hidden from view, quietly retreats, his departure hinted at by a slight noise. The discovery of the bolt cutter on the floor confirms someone's presence prompted JT to call out a warning to Ricky, who he suspects to be the intruder. JT's pursuit, however, is interrupted by the reappearance of the menacing black dog, forcing him to abandon the chase and retreat hastily. In the ensuing events, the narrative reintroduces the asthmatic boy from the opening scene, who approaches Ricky in the locker room, inquiring about Wheeler's whereabouts. He mentions Wheeler's promise of a, quote, amazing sight in return for $10, fueling Ricky's concern about their secret being exposed. Ricky then meets and asks Wheeler what his plans are and where JT is. He's scared that someone will notice JT hasn't been in class all week. But Wheeler tells him to look out for himself, as Joanne's boyfriend has been watching him closely recently. Later, Wheeler heads to the hospital and discovers JT involved in yet another explicit act with the undead woman at the hospital. Wheeler's attempts to investigate the woman's identity and origin fall on JT's deaf ears, revealing JT's lack of interest in anything beyond his sexual desires. The atmosphere in the room grows increasingly disgusting and stinky due to the woman's decaying wounds and the remnants of their horrific sexual acts. They both share a morbid laugh about the warmth and wetness seeping from her wounds and genitals, adding another layer of horror to their already disturbing exploits. While elsewhere, a group of girls is engaged in a basketball game. Ricky is seen at the court's edge. Joanne approaches to retrieve a ball that slipped from her hands. As she gets close to Ricky, they start to engage in a conversation, remembering a childhood kiss they once shared. Seizing the opportunity, Ricky tentatively suggests spending more time together. However, she politely rejects him, telling him that their past chemistry no longer holds relevance. In the following scenes, Ricky finds his locker distorted with a threatening message reading, "You are dead." Subsequently, he and Wheeler get brutally beaten by Dwyer and Johnny, Joanne's boyfriend, apparently for paying her too much attention. Despite Joanne's efforts to intervene and stop him, Johnny ignores her, aggravating her to the point where she leaves the scene. In the midst of the tension, Wheeler suddenly yells out in anger, spilling their secret that they had a sex slave. He tries to use this as a reason why they don't want to even look at Joanne. But Dwyer and Johnny are shocked by this news and insist on seeing this so-called sex slave. Upon reaching the hospital, Ricky refuses to be their guide to the undead woman, leading Dwyer to knocking him unconscious with a bat. When Ricky regains consciousness, he finds all the boys already in the room with JT, who's been present before their arrival. JT offers the newcomers an opportunity to partake in their sexual activities, insisting the woman enjoys rough treatment. Despite Ricky's protests, Dwyer accepts JT's proposition while Johnny dismisses the offer, hinting at his relationship with Joanne, a move designed to provoke Ricky. Ricky retaliates by challenging Johnny's masculinity, suggesting he isn't man enough to even take a free act of oral gratification from the undead woman. At the exact moment, the woman shifts her gaze to Ricky, seemingly aware of the conversation. Offended by Ricky's banter, Johnny reluctantly agrees to participate in an oral gratification with the woman and approaches her. As Johnny engages in an act of violation with the woman's mouth and Dwyer with her body, everything proceeds as expected at first. But as Ricky tries to intervene, the woman abruptly retaliates, biting Johnny in the most intimate of places, leaving him bleeding and screaming in agony. From the newcomers, the threats of informing the police arise in response to the incident. However, JT calmly reminds them of their shared involvement in the sexual assault, effectively silencing their threats. As Johnny and Dwyer quickly depart, JT expresses his anger towards Wheeler and Ricky for their careless outbursts that led to this whole situation. Later that evening, Ricky seeks out Joanne to explain the impending rumors she's likely to hear about the day's events. He tries to expose Johnny's lack of genuine affection for her, but is dismissed as she fears being seen with him. Meanwhile, JT's grip on his mind appears to be loosening as he rarely leaves the hospital. In an eerie scene, he's found applying lipstick to the undead woman, drawing dangerously close to her despite the risk of her violent response. Just then, the familiar black dog appears, menacingly growling at JT. As the dog leaps at JT, the woman reacts instinctively, swiftly ending the dog's life with a vicious bite. In the following scenes, the movie transitions to a classroom setting where Ricky, Johnny, and other students are engaged in their lessons. Johnny's noticeably restless, twitching in his seat, clearly in agony. Unable to bear the discomfort any longer, he dashes to the restroom in a desperate rush, but instead of relief, he finds himself in an even more gruesome situation as he excretes not just blood, but his own internal organs, staining the restroom stall in a shocking hue of red and a foul odor. The scene then shifts back to Ricky, who's seen attempting to release the undead woman, now grotesquely beautified with another woman's face thanks to JT's weird deeds. Just as he starts to remove the woman's restraints, JT, who appears to have been living in the hospital for several days, intercepts him. An argument erupts between the two friends, Ricky, noting that Johnny started to emit the same foul odor as the undead woman, argues that they should set her free. His pleas, however, fall on deaf ears. Instead, the woman seizes the opportunity to bite Ricky. As he wrestles with the woman and JT, Ricky jolts awake, realizing it was all a horrific nightmare. The real narrative picks up again with JT and Wheeler outside the gas station attempting to abduct a random woman to serve as their next undead sex slave. However, the woman manages to overpower them and escapes. Unfortunately, Joanne shows up at the gas station just as they're preparing to leave, demanding to know what they've done to Johnny, who is now in a miserable situation. Instead of explaining, JT offers to show her. In the next scene, Ricky's seen entering a room now oddly decorated with fairy lights, carrying a large blade. He discovers the undead woman tied up, her hand stretched above her head. Just as he raises the blade to free her, he hears a soft whimper. The sound, it turns out, comes from Joanne, who's also bound and blindfolded behind the undead woman. Shocked to find her there, Ricky rushes to free her. However, JT intervenes, proposing to create an army of undead women. JT tries to convince Ricky that this way he can have Joanne all to himself. Ricky, however, strongly rejects the idea. As the argument intensifies, Wheeler begins to inappropriately touch Joanne, ignoring warnings from both JT and Ricky. This sends Ricky into a rage, and in a swift motion, he cuts off Wheeler's offending arm. In the ensuing chaos, Joanne stealthily begins to undo the undead woman's restraints. As soon as she's free, the undead woman lunges at Wheeler, savagely biting his already bleeding body, marking a dramatic turn in the story. Seizing the moment, Ricky quietly unties Joanne, and the pair desperately try to escape the macabre room. They scramble up the stairs, hearts pounding in their chests, only to find the exit door sealed shut, the wire barricade refusing to give way despite their frantic efforts. Joanne descends into a panic, kicking and screaming, despite Ricky's attempts to soothe her. After a few intense moments, she manages to calm down enough to listen to him. It's at this point that the undead woman gives them a fright, lunging to escape the room. However, JT, clinging onto the chain around her neck, manages to pull her back in. Then Ricky asks Joanne to stay put while he searches for an alternative escape route. Yet to his dismay, he finds no other way out. As he retraces his steps back to the stairs, he discovers Joanne is no longer where he left her. Filled with dread, he dashes back to the room, only to find the undead woman in the midst of tearing JT's lips off. Fear paralyzes Ricky as the woman turns her attention towards him and begins to charge. He sees his life flash before his eyes, but to his surprise, the woman has no interest in him. She simply barrels past him, sending him sprawling to the floor before breaking through the exit and disappearing into the world outside. Ricky stumbles back onto his feet just as Joanne reappears, stumbling and looking alarmingly pale. She collapses just as she reaches him, revealing that JT had stabbed her in their struggle. Determined not to lose her, Ricky vows to get her out of the room, swearing he won't let her die. His efforts, however, are largely unsuccessful as Joanne is too weak to move. Watching Ricky struggle, JT makes a chilling offer, led him by Joanne turning her into another undead woman like the first, thereby saving her life. Ricky rejects the gruesome proposal outright. As Joanne's condition worsens, she implores Ricky to repeat the words he'd said during their earlier argument. He confesses his deep love for her, but Joanne, even as she clings to life, tells him to grow up. The pain of her words is etched onto Ricky's face. The movie comes full circle, ending with an oddly content-looking Ricky in the classroom. The final scene unfolds, revealing Joanne now garbed in a white dress, confined in the same cursed room, which has now taken on a slightly less grim appearance. She has become their new dead girl, bringing a haunting conclusion to the tale. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.